This Wookiee got out of hand and had to be put down. We'll find another easy enough.
Tarfful spent years fighting Trandoshan slavers.
Kashyyyk has been critically wounded in a Trade Federation ambush.
Happy Life Day, everyone.
What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will pull from every canon and legend source out there to give us a complete understanding of the Wookiee species. From their biology, fascinating hallucinogenic mystical religion, unique traditions, and you'll quickly see why they might have had the toughest lot of any species in the galaxy. Being consistently under attack from plants, animals, and then non-stop alien oppression in just about every form you can think of. Their story begins on their homeworld of Kashyyyk at grid coordinates P9 in the mid-rim of the galaxy. Their solar system has 8 planets, with their world at orbit position 3, followed by the Grill asteroid belt, then Trandosha, homeworld of the Trandoshans, and we'll be covering how these people's cultures became intimately intertwined. Kashyyyk has 3 moons, a 26-hour day, and 381 days in a year, being 12,765 kilometers across, and with nearly the entire world being jungles and forests, dotted with lakes and separated by seas, all full of millions of unique animal species. With almost 60% of this world covered by water, and the most notable flora being the Roshar trees. And although this natural wonder of a world was considered beautiful through countless alien eyes, they all quickly came to describe the lush swamps and oceans as layered death traps. As the further you traveled into the greens or blues, the more creatures you came across, with the Wookiee cultures organizing the forest into 7 levels, with 7 being the easiest to live in, and even the bravest Wookiees would stop at level 4. That gets complicated as they move up into treetops, so just visualize it like the layers of an onion, with the easiest level 7 starting at the coasts, and then moving up into the tops of the trees. And so each level after that is both further from the coast or further down the tree. In a way, this layering idea is a lot like the levels of Coruscant. But instead of being shanked by a spicehead on 1313, Wookiee parents warned you of the gruesome ways both the plants and wildlife of the forest floor were all conspiring to kill and eat you. The ground level, known as the Shadowlands or Netherworld, had its most infamous flora, the Siren plant, a beautiful, large yellow flower sitting on a blood-red stalk, with strong white fibers lining the leaves. It would release pheromones that acted like a siren's call, that was nearly undeniable for all animals, and even tempting for adult Wookiees that knew about this thing. If you touched its petals, you'd be caught in its sticky goo, though it became a status symbol for young adults to venture into the Shadowlands with a group of trusted friends, using specialized tools to hold down the petals, while the brave Wookiee harvested the siren fiber, turning it into a symbolic piece of clothing like Lobaka's belt, which showed everyone how crazy and capable you were. While Kithius vine plants were used to make strings for the bowcaster, the Orga were believed to be sentient and use their own language. They even had a sort of weapon, not just their thorns, but could whip these vines like tentacles, and had seed pods that could be fired, exploding to release a corrosive acid. But they ended up in a symbiotic relationship with the Wookiee, probably due to ceremonies formed over countless generations in pre-recorded history, which is still remembered today in the Life Day ceremony and the worship of the Tree of Life. This plant allowed parts of its roots to be harvested and experience hallucinations they interpreted as a communion and spiritual passage with the Tree of Life.
Yeah, I miss the Republic too. Have you ever tried Orga roots on Kashyyyk?
It shouldn't be ignored that this may have been an ancient alien organic device to communicate with other sentients, as Old Republic era researchers believe that the Roshar tree was alien to Kashyyyk, imported by the Rakatan species, info gained by a Rakata computer near one of the star maps.
This utility was built to monitor planet-wide agricultural reformation. It has since malfunctioned. It can be theorized that the supergrowth of Kashyyyk forests is a direct result.
Well, that is surprising. I doubt any Wookiee would support such a claim. The forest is millennia old.
Malfunction occurred 241 years after last builder communication. Last builder communication, 29,642 years before current Republic standard.
These maps, being artifacts left behind and self-sustained on dark-side energy, were meant to be testaments to the greatness of the Infinite Empire. Since we know the shape we call humanoid came from the Ones, but then directly from Rakatan engineering for dozens of species across the galaxy, it is possible the unique, violent, and sentient life we find here may have been influenced by these dark-side-wielding ancient aliens. Because that was just the plants. For fauna, there were varieties of banthas and the terrifying Tarentatex and Wishok or giant weavers. Unlike most spiders, they were known to track their prey for over a kilometer, leading them into webbed traps that they had previously set up. and biting into the prey, injecting enormous amounts of venom, enough to kill Wookiees and even banthas. So far more than what was needed to down a Coruscanti researcher. And perhaps agitated by the electromagnetic signatures of droids, they are known to quickly destroy any droid sent their way. Even in the modern era, xenobiologists have had a hard time studying the Shadowlands, with these spiders creating labyrinths with their webs and actively hunting down anything inside. Oh, and almost all these species develop to see in complete darkness, making any form of light you use act like a giant kill-me beacon. Having evolved in this environment, the Wookiee have incredible strength and respectable intelligence, and a frame that came to stand from 2 to 2.54 meters or 8 foot 4 inches, with females weighing in around 100 kilograms and males at 150 kilograms or 330 pounds, which is about the average weight of a black bear. But that's with them being 30 to 40% body fat, while Wookiee physiology seems to be the exact opposite, a bit taller, leaner, and more muscular. And thinking of people like Ed Cohn, who set the record for being the strongest person pound for pound, barely weighing 150 pounds when he achieved a 485 pound squat, 295 pound bench, and 495 pound deadlift. So at being around 300 pounds of pure muscle, you can see why the Shredwooks of Kashyyyk can toss around just about any other species they come across. We'll see later in their history how slavers were drawn to this trait as well. Their coats were their most striking feature, being water resistant and helping to protect them from bites and cold weather, coming in a variety of colors from black, brown, gray, and white. While so-called silverbacks were a unique subspecies, technically not Wookiees, and Rooks are considered a subspecies named for their city Rook. But this seems more like a race or a type, since Chewbacca was a Rook, and it seems like these three types can interbreed over multiple generations and having cultures that were pretty well all mixed. Though there were the rare albino Wookiees, which were considered a bad omen, stemming from the practical concern that they would not blend in with their environment, and get themselves and their clanmates targeted by the countless predators of the forest. With old age, even though they were covered in hair, growing long beards was a sign of growing into a mature, sagely role, while their eyes were blue or brown, with irises that could range from green, yellow, or red. With all that muscle, they required a daily caloric intake of around 3,500 to 6,000 calories. The diet composed of everything from berries, onions, hot spices, and mostly meat, with dishes so spicy that it would cause permanent damage to a human digestive tract. And same goes for their adult beverages, refining alcohols from all sorts of plants to make a karagam, kordig and thickian brandy, the garmorel and graki, all of which could cause alcohol poisoning if the human didn't stumble off the tree cities for their long fall to their death. Of course, Wookiees are staying healthy by making sure they take in a wide variety of vitamins and minerals, but instead of foraging the Shadowlands, I just take AG1. Starting the day with 75 vitamins and minerals sourced from whole foods, stress adaptogens, superfoods, and mushrooms. I am very excited to be sponsored by AG1.
They give you this little bottle here, and then you put all your powder in this guy, put it in the fridge, helps it last longer. Put your scoop. You can't do this with protein shake. I didn't believe it at first either, but watch how easy this is. And it's actually mixed up. None of that clumping, none of that. Look at that, perfectly mixed with just a couple simple shakes. I got some on my shirt, but that's okay. I've actually been able to stick with this every morning. I have it on an empty stomach, just like they recommend. And it's not like drinking a salad, if that's what you're worried about. It actually has like a pineapple-y, vanilla, gingery kind of taste to it. It's actually really good.
I won't make any wild health claims, but NSF third-party testing ensures that there are no herbicides transferring over from those plant sources, and that everything they claim is in there actually is in there. Likewise, the FDA allows them to make claims about supporting healthy aging, immune health, skin, and hair health, but what I noticed most was the gut digestion and energy levels. I've been feeling a more calm, steady energy, less grogginess, and less acid reflux symptoms.
If you want to pick it up, check out the link in the description
to get a free 1-year supply of AG Vitamin D3 plus K2, plus 5 AG1 travel packs with your first purchase of AG1. Their hands have 4 fingers with opposable thumbs, with some of the most powerful muscles being in the hands, with retractable claws that could fire out from hidden sheaths in the fingertips. While their backs, thighs, and calves were ridiculously strong as well. While the nose was so sensitive that the presence of meat would send them into a sort of overwhelming olfactory delirium, salivating past sharp teeth, with fangs that could puncture through the hardest scales and even some artificial armor. They would breathe through human-like lungs, and similarly were known to develop allergies and asthma. though like the rest of them, their lungs were far stronger than humans, most evident in instruments that humans could not even use, like the Kashyyyk clarion. Their genetic similarities to other humanoids also exposed them to artificial bioweapons created by other alien species, like the Blackwing virus, which would reduce them to mindless and murderous zombies. As they built cities, they opted for the abundant wood and would build sprawling compounds connected by bridges, somewhat like the Ewoks, with these sloping surfaces helping to direct rain and provide an overhang for all the home dwellings. While there are some flat open spots that acted like landing pads, and some are large markets or celebration areas, with some of the most sacred spaces and luxury homes being actually carved through the trees, with each structure being attached via sap acting like glue, and tied in place via plant material, though you still had to make sure that the branches were perfectly wedged in place. Even their largest cities of later eras used no modern tech like repulsor lifts. These are all just perfectly balanced on the trees with plant ropes and adhesives. These trees reach several kilometers in height, with some being 300 to 400 meters, which is still capital ship range, with the largest being taller than a Venator is long. So you could see how you would have to go out of your way to travel down to the forest floor. The species is split into males and females, with females having 6 breasts for providing milk for their offspring, giving live birth and having a gestation period of nearly a year. Wookiee pups were almost a meter long at birth, which must have produced some of the most Duraglass shattering roars, challenging the Zabrak mothers, as that newborn is nearly as tall as an Ewok. Due to how deadly this world was, it only takes about a year for the pup to become fully conscious and walk unassisted, and would slowly reach their max height after puberty, and then some would actually shrink in old age, called nanism, where some were as short as 1.7 meters or 5 foot 7 inches. While they are famous for their long lifespan, living for several centuries, they are beat only by a very few rare people like the Gendai. Their early education started with their first year of life, so as soon as they were self-aware, they already understood their place in the natural harmony of Kashyyyk, going to communal schools and venturing into the wilderness to understand how everything in their society was sourced and produced, before going home toward the end of the day to be with their family. This schooling period didn't last long, definitely not more than a decade, and they would quickly be shifting to spend the day at home helping the grandparents with chores around the house. By the age of 12, the males would perform an initiation ritual. The most common was the gathering of fibers from the siren plant mentioned before, and upon returning, they were considered to have entered young adulthood. While in some regions, there was the Test of Ascension, or Hurtak ceremony, in which the youth had to unlock their Raktor, or inner strength. They would be dropped off in the Shadowlands, and they had to rely on their survival knowledge to avoid predators, making a shelter and everything from tools to utensils. Chewbacca was actually a bit of a late bloomer, performing his Hurtak in the year 187 BBY when he was already 13 years old. At 18, they were full legal adults, but not considered in their prime until they were about 200. While their family would be looking for them to show they were engaged with a career, generating enough income to start a household of their own, and settling down to marry and start a family. Middle age was 301 to 350, old was 351 to 399, and venerable was 400 years plus. Wookiee marriage would have been similar to many species across the stars, being a pair that was bonded for life, sharing a bed only with each other, and expected to raise a standard number of 2 or 3 kids. The Wookiee society was a patriarchal one, with the 400-plus-year-old venerables making most of the decisions for the tribe, and then in later eras making decisions for the city. The chieftain oversaw everything from civil to military affairs, and could even cancel the celebration of holy day festivals. Over the millennia, there came to be a planetary king, who came from a patriarch family, which moved up from a chieftain, and dwelling in the royal city, working with the leaders of cities all over the planet in an efficient and well-organized distribution of responsibilities, for a people that were mostly thought to be ferocious, hot-headed warriors. Though after joining the Republic, they would develop a lesser king system with the senator going off to express the wishes for the king, while the elders still respected and hoped to influence, but still deferred to the senator on complex decisions, with king and senator working together to decide on engaging in things like interplanetary war. It wasn't unusual for the father to leave for long periods of time, leaving the raising of children to the mothers and grandparents and wider social network. Their clan structure comprised what we would call several nuclear families, and these clans would develop century-long friendships or arch rivalries with other clans. Family in this sense extended further out than what most would consider to be blood or a shared last name, and if a Wookiee was saved from death, they owed their savior a life debt. This extended to anyone, even of another species or rival clan, and would last for their entire life. This created an honor family which would be brought into the larger clan. As for their technology, they would come to be known throughout the galaxy for the intricate, high-quality wood carvings, which they practiced since childhood, meaning an expert could have been carving them for hundreds of years. It's very interesting that there is no word for artist in any of the Shriwook language variants. None of them saw this as an art, but a side product of their survival skills. Even though other cultures develop sayings like, give a Wookiee a knife, and send him into the forest in the morning, and by evening he would have carved you a table to eat dinner on, and a house to put it in. Just because everything was in wood and other plant materials, most saw their tech as primitive, but a closer look would show you that they created things like blaster weapons, and even hulls of starships using the flexible, durable Rorschach tree. They were quick to understand alien tech as well, swapping out parts and repairing things, even with stories of hyperdrives being repaired using pieces of hardwood. The Twi'lek Guild was a secret society of Wookiee cartographers that had been able to hide the location of certain hyperspace routes, and developed an extensive knowledge of the galactic trade routes that often surpassed the native populations involved, leading to a lot of enmity between the Guild and many shipping cartels, who knew that if they could just discover these routes, they could cut out the Wookiees and reap even greater profits. They operated out of the city of Kashyyyk, located deep in the tree Vikilian. When it came to warfare, they were not an aggressive people. Just because they had fiery tempers and could enter a berserker rage that altered their biochemistry until the object of their rage was thoroughly destroyed, they used no organized martial arts style, seeming to just chaotically charge and swing their limbs at targets, beating down with fists, slicing open with their claws, biting with piercing teeth, or ripping limbs off with their sheer strength.
Nobody worries about upsetting a droid.
It's because a droid don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose. Wookiees are known to do that.
Their reputation for removing limbs and even pulling heads off of stormtroopers, even when the helmets were sealed into their undersuits, led to things like deal slang in the underworld like Wookiee. For example, you would say, hey, I don't want that guy getting away. Take a plasma cutter and Wookiee him. Just make sure he doesn't roll away when you're done. Again, despite all this, they would try to avoid warfare. They never initiated wars on their neighbors. By the time of their treetop cities, there were no accounts of tribal wars, and no bloody revolutions to overthrow their planetary king. Perhaps because of their great strength and rage states, they found social ways to direct this into contests that could be settled by things other than simply murdering your enemy. Like Vikings developing flitting, or rap battles developed in violent neighborhoods. It isn't odd, but perhaps because of the violence that these outlets were developed. Same with the Wookiees, they came to settle disputes with elaborate theatrical performances. Dances like rhythms of stomping and posturing, and whoever was the most impressive was considered the winner. And these deadly, capable people all respected the decision. Of course, that was the norm, but there were some times where passions were too heated, and a fight did break out. But even when that happened, they were not supposed to take out their claws. These fights were shunned but still accepted, though in the extremely rare cases, where a Wookiee would utterly lose themselves and start slicing with their claws, horrifying the onlookers who would move to detain him and label him a Mad Claw, before going through the formal process of exiling them, either to live off-world or down in the Shadowlands. And the shame of this unique fall was a stain on their clan for millennia, as the story was passed down over several Wookiee lifespans. As for the weapons themselves, their most famous piece was their bowcaster. Coming in many varieties and often sporting clan markings, they weren't that expensive to produce, usually given as gifts on world and sold for just around 1,200 credits to aliens. They were effective around 30 yards and could carry anywhere from 6 to 35 shots, and packed a punch.
I like this thing.
Which is what attracted some bounty hunters like Embo. They could also use all sorts of weapons like the Disruptor Carbine, the X1, a smaller version, the Yeargate pistol, while the heavy Stalker Blaster was a small version of the bowcaster, and a variety of projectile-based slug throwers. Though if they could, they enjoyed using hand-to-hand weapons like the Spirit Blade and Rook, some of the few metal weapons, and altering things like Vibrolances into the Heart Lance, and last but definitely not least, Brass Knuckles. Now before we get to their history, I want to talk about their language. Collectively, all the dialects are known simply as Wookiee language, but the most common by far was Shriwook, meaning tongue of the tree people. This became a trade language, which is why it isn't too odd that Han Solo would know some, and their relationship is standard since the Wookiees can easily understand many languages, but can only speak in Wookiee tongues due to their unique vocal cords. And most humans cannot make the guttural sounds of the tree folk. so it's one of the few interactions where the two people are talking in their native language while still understanding each other without the need of a droid interpreter. Some other dialects include Zakzik, spoken in the Wartaki Islands, and Thaikaran, which was rich in technical jargon. Now for their history, we need to go back 2 million years, when the Wookiee had evolved into its anatomically modern state, and they were coming to establish dominance on their ecosystem. Most researchers believe that they were simply able to literally rise above the competition, being excellent climbers and able to move out of the Shadowlands and into the light of the canopy. This is part of why the Roshar trees took on such a religious significance, as they were literally the saviors of their ancestors, as well as their providers throughout history. Sometime around 40,000 BBY, the Infinite Empire of the Rakata terraformed this planet to make it more suitable for agricultural purposes. And though this may have greatly reduced the natural forests, when they were destroyed and the machines left behind, it is theorized that left unattended, these radiated the energy that could have led to the Roshar trees growing several kilometers tall. And since all of their tech drew from the dark side energy, the homes of these friendly and honorable people were shaped and originally powered by darkness. And it is with the Rakata that they would get their first and nowhere near last taste of slavery, as these aliens moved thousands of them to the Rakatan archipelago, with many ending up on Malata. To save on time and credits, they often forced inbreeding with their slaves, resulting in a sickly stock of genetically deformed Wookiees with stooped shoulders, hairless, and long incisors. One of the 8 Thoyor, likely created by the Ones, these enigmatic craft spread throughout the galaxy during what would be called the First Migration, which set down on various worlds in 36,453 BBY, with the goal of collecting Force sensitives and transporting them to Tython to create the Jedi Order. Nearly 10,000 years later, in 25,797 BBY, some of these Wookiees would immigrate to a neighboring world in the Tython system, Skagora, and this group came under the leadership of a Wookiee warlord. They were set on killing the natives on the ground, but most of the natives lived on floating cities. When the warlord refused to surrender, the Jedi Ranger Lenore Brock lived with them for a time to try and convince them to leave the forest, but when this failed, she returned to her perfectly named Peacemaker-class cruiser. She ordered a complete bombardment of the Wookiee-occupied forests. The tree people became one with the woods as the greenery turned into massive piles of ash. It would be relatively quiet on Kashyyyk for the next 20,000+ years until Czerka Corporation discovered them and was able to be awarded investment contracts by the Galactic Republic, which was hoping to expand development out to every rim of the galaxy. Even though there had been Wookiee Jedi, navigators, warlords, and thus probably every other type of occupation, and being a very identifiable species, perhaps due to major payoffs to corrupt senators, Czerka was able to declare that there were no sentient inhabitants on Kashyyyk. First it was cataloged as G5623, then they let stockholders vote on naming it, and it was then called Ideen.
Czerka Corporation calls the planet Ideen, and no, I don't understand the language. The local Wookiee leader has made it so we don't need to.
Slave markets were the very first industry imported to this world, with Czerka having no real regulations. Essentially, any slaver would just pay a fee to go hunting, and likely pay for whatever Wookiees they were able to take captive, which likely would have included the Zygerians. The natives were lucky that the Mandalorian Wars and Jedi Civil War did not bring their fighting here, having no major trade importance or force nexus, but like seen with the Twi'leks on Ryloth, their plight got even worse when their own people started working with the slavers. Chundar was born as a runt, and always felt like he was unimpressive in his clan. He sought out Czerka personnel to offer to lead the hunt for his fellow Wookiees, using his knowledge of the Shadowlands to track down even Wookiee groups that went into hiding. When his brother Zalbar found out, he attacked him in an open trial, using his claws to try and kill him, earning the title of Mad Claw. And even though his father was chieftain, he still honored the tradition and exiled his good son. Worse, the stain of a Mad Claw and slaver traitor in the family pushed for the father, Freyr, to be removed from power. And with the Czerka operatives manipulating other Wookiees, Chundar was promoted to the new chieftain, and then made it look like he was being tough on the slavers, striking a deal to greatly reduce the rate, but while giving up all the natural rights in his territory. Equipped with the alien arsenal from machines to heavy repeating blaster weapons, he was able to prevent any civil war from breaking out. It would need to be another off-worlder, and one of the greatest force wielders in history to come save the day. Revan arrived with the exiled Zalbar, and when they were tasked with hunting a mad Wookiee in the Shadowlands, they found out it was Freyr. and the disgraced father worked with Revan to find Baka's ceremonial blade, which they used to lead a revolt against Chundar and Zerka. When the runt refused to step down, he was killed. This snowballed into a planet-wide revolt that took the Zerka local HQ and forever freed them from this corporation, paving the way for the next threat. It seems like they might have only had a few lifespans, maybe 1,000 years, before the Trandoshans arrived. And when the Wookiees chased off their scouts, they were able to force them to leave the ship behind. At this time, they did not have any native spacefaring industry, never got a chance to capture anything from Zerka. With this Trandoshan ship, they were able to reverse engineer many parts, and the Wookiee space program was launched. All while the lizards on the other side of the asteroid belt were spreading through the hyperlanes, and had established good relations with the Corellian traders. They were willing to make credits, but refused to join them as allies in capturing Kashyyyk and carving it up for themselves. And even though they didn't want to start blasting, the Corellians did move to open trade with the Wookiees, though many others noticed that they were taking advantage of the Tree People. Always the defender of alien groups, the Alderaanian Diplomatic Corps sent reps to explain to the Wookiees their rights, and help them understand galactic economics, and help draft their petition to the Galactic Republic for their own seat in the Senate. And shortly after, the first Wookiee senator was sitting in the rotunda, thanks to the intervention from Alderaan. Now the better informed Wookiee leadership renegotiated deals with the Corellians, becoming a surprising rising star in the Republic. And with this wealth, they bought hyperdrive tech from the Duros, established cultural strategies programs in Alderaan's finest universities, and traded raw materials for the cutting-edge manufacturing processes perfected by the Verpine. All loved the walking carpet people, and many cited what was dubbed the wisdom of the Wookiees, as they achieved a high-tech, comfortable modern life, without losing touch of their ancient traditions or destroying their environment, while every era saw a moderate stream of younglings in the Jedi Order. Being the new darlings of the galactic community, and just the material success and riches alone, all kicked off from that recovered Trandoshan ship, was driving the lizards insane. Fuming and plotting their revenge, it was revealed by their shaman that the Scorekeeper, their ancient god who weighed the souls of all her lizard children, would be especially pleased by the capture and murder of Wookiees. Jagannath points were given for great hunts, and their powerful Wookiee neighbors made for one of the greatest hunts in the galaxy. Though it can't be ignored how convenient this revelation was, or that there were tons of other more dangerous wild beasts that should have been far more impressive to hunt. The sheer pride and joy the lizards took in killing Wookiees stemmed from them being overshadowed on this galactic scale. Again, some Wookiees were captured and sold into slavery, some were moved to the Trandoshans' hunting ground Moon, stalking islands of various game, while the most brazen would lead hunts into Wookiee cities and then down into the Shadowlands, braving all sorts of beasts, not just Wookiee, earning the most Jagannath points for the Cosmic Scorekeeper. Wookiee pelts were coveted all across Trandosha, using them from clothing or hanging them on their wall for both decor and as a status symbol. And unlike the other far-off alien oppressors, being just a planet away and now integrally tied into their culture, the Trandoshan raids never stopped, being a problem up until modern-day accounts of their history. Moving up to the year 59 BBY, the Wookiees would rediscover the lost moon Alaris Prime, which was hidden behind a locked orbit with the gas giant Alaris. Chieftain Kashyyyk was the senator at this time, and fought to negotiate their rights to colonize it against their claims being made by the Trade Federation. This legal battle would take 2 decades to resolve, and it wasn't until 39 BBY that they would have the full rights to colonize, the chieftain moving there with his son Chewbacca and nephew Shorin. It wasn't long before Qui-Gon Jinn arrived to help them in their fight against the local predatory Gundarks, and in doing so, Chewbacca came across B-1 battle droids, revealing that the Trade Federation had established an illegal base on Alaris Prime. By around 36 BBY, 3 years before the Battle of Naboo, the Wookiees were getting a preview of the military might of the TF, as a full-on war erupted that would decide who would retain this moon. One of the droid units were led by the Trandoshan Pect, who despite eventually being overwhelmed by the Wookiee forces, the lizard was able to escape, though he would never give up on his dream of collecting pelts. The Trade Federation had become the archenemies of the Wookiee people, with the great Tyvaka, Jedi Master to Plo Koon, having been only semi-accidentally killed by the pre-B1 droids, the hunter-killers used by Newt Gunray. When they were attacked during peace talks at the Stark Combine, Newt ordered his droids to open fire, only concerned with protecting himself. He didn't care who was killed in the crossfire. Senator Yarua was still the sole representative of the Kashyyyk system, a name which itself was insulting to their sentient neighbors, with Trandoshans being represented by their enemies in the Senate. And growing tensions around the Battle of Naboo, the lizards attempted an assassination, but Yarua survived. By 23 BBY, A year before the Battle of Geonosis, a Wookiee ship was shot down over a moon of Trandosha, prompting the Wookiees to put in a full blockade on the Lizard World. Oppo Rancisis would arrive to help with mediation, but the talks fell apart when they found out that the Trade Federation was coaching the Trandoshans to push for them to have a Senate rep, hoping to keep friendly votes on Coruscant. Even with their archenemies being so tied to the TF and living on their cosmic doorstep, they hoped to stay neutral during the Clone Wars, and were successful for a while until separatist droids killed Prince Rikumi. King Rakchawa swiftly rallied his people to support the Republic, and war would not come to Kashyyyk until the final months of the war, with the first major invasion occurring at Kachiro Beach, hoping to capture the guild headquarters and exploit these secret hyperlanes. Jedi Master Yoda, friend of the Wookiees, worked with Unduli, Voss, Suchoi, and Etain Termukin with the 41st Elite Corps, 76th Regiment, 91st Recon Corps, Delta and Omega squads, and integrating with the furry fighters to understand the natives' weapons, tactics, and capabilities, with Wookiee leaders Tarful, Gumbaki, and Chewbacca. Because of the unique terrain with sand, marsh, large trees, and different bodies of water, the Republic felt the ATTE was not a good fit, opting with the Juggernaut and lighter walkers, while the CIS opted for the lighter PACs instead of the enormous MTT. The blockade overhead would be cut through by the 501st, taking out a Munificent and Providence, while Delta Squad moved to rescue Tarful from the Trandoshan mercenary camp.
Do you mean an entire operation?
Your team was the advance force for a full-scale Republic invasion. I had strict orders not to tell you. It was your reconnaissance, your intel that verified the operation, and now the invasion has begun.
Only now was the beach assault launched, as droid forces raced toward their sacred tree cities. And though this would prove a decisive Wookiee win, their luck would change again almost instantly. With the declaration of Order 66, they watched as Yoda sliced through troopers' heads and could tell who the good guys were, rushing the Jedi to a craft to make an escape, and turned to see the extent of the troopers' new missions on Kashyyyk. Shortly after, the Republic became the Empire, and within days there was a complete blockade over their home, with stormtroopers placing all cities under martial law. The Trandoshans, enemies of the Republic last week, were now coordinating with Imperial brass to construct the Avatar Orbital Platform, a space station that was used to process Wookiee slaves for sale and export across the galaxy, leaving the actual capture of the furballs to their hated enemies, while making sure to ransack the Hyperdrive Guild HQ in the tree and extract all this intel that had been coveted by everyone for centuries. Wookiees that tried to escape the city lockdowns and build a rebellion were met by roving groups of cold-blooded hunters. Once this pushed the city dwellers to rebel, the imps had their footage and pretext to make them enemies of the Empire, initiating the complete enslavement of these people. Many were sold off to enormous operations like the Kessel mining facilities, being worked to death in these horrid conditions. What is really odd is that they found it necessary to get involved in evolutionary history theories, newly being published at the University of Coruscant. Now there was an elaborate story that the Wookiees had evolved from a herd of banthas that survived a crash landing from a Neimoidian ship, and that they were first discovered by the Trade Federation. Other than muddle the proud culture of these people, maybe it would make them seem more like an overblown myth, with caveman-level products barely above animals. And maybe just throwing in that Neimoidian and Trade Federation connection would link the most hated people of the Clone Wars to the Wookiees. A very subtle subconscious manipulation. But the fact that they felt any of this was necessary does show how loved the Wookiee were in the community, hoping to make any support of them to be seen as anti-scientific, weird, antisocial hippie impulses that romanticize these primitive people, with the video evidence of them being in open rebellion with the Empire. And while on Kashyyyk, the slaves not sold off were put to work refining sap from the Rorschach trees in Imperial refineries. The sap could be heavily processed into a volatile chemical compound that could be used as fuel, but this would destroy the trees. And for every barrel of sap refined, it produced more than 200 metric tons of industrial waste, which was all dumped into the rivers near the refineries to be carried off downstream. This would be done throughout the Imperial era, possibly for more than 20 years, so the full effects of this process may be unknown. And while the Geonosians did the bulk of the designing and early building of the Death Star, like we saw that some components were made through the tedious work of prisoners, other components like this were similarly constructed with the powerful and dexterous Wookiee hands. The survival, self-claimed non-artistry skills being used to create a device that could destroy planets and reduce everyone to Palpatine's slave. Others like Grand Moff Lawson Tulruk conducted all sorts of medical experiments on live Wookiee subjects, and preferred implanting inhibitor chips which helped to keep their bulk under control. and even then some were willing to fight through this, leading to the Imperial policy of keeping the children of the clan in captivity away from the rest of their family. Even if they couldn't work, the imps would threaten to kill or torture the pups, proving to be the only thing possible for snuffing out a Wookiee's berserker rage. All of this only worked to make the Wookiees at large in the galaxy some of the most effective freedom fighters of the growing rebel movements. Some would join Saw's partisans, others joining what would become the Alliance, and many ran in their own cell, working with anyone who aligned with their goals. A strike team responded to the Outer Rim planet of Lasan, the homeworld of the Lasat, that was being set for a complete extermination of the natives. The Wookiee warriors wielded weapons crafted from the Roshar trees, from bowcasters to rifles to polearms, and with these they were able to ensure the escape of a small number of Lasat, including Garazeb Aurelios. Around this same time, Commodore Thrawn and Lieutenant Commander Eli Vanto were hunting down a rebel band and realized that they were liberating a Wookiee slave hauler. To show how much compartmentalization and secrets there were in the Empire, that even years later, Thrawn was unaware of it. After going through the reports and confirming that these were slaves, apparently a part of a massive slave trade operation, Eli Vanto expressed his disgust, but Thrawn was able to rationalize this and explained that their role in this was clear.
They are called slaves, but they may in fact be indentured servants. They may be prisoners working off their sentence. They may have sold themselves into slavery as a means of repaying debts to others on their world. You really think any of those are likely? No, but it does not matter. However these beings were pressed into service, they are now Imperial assets. They will be treated as such. Understood, Commodore?
It was shortly after this that the Spectre's rebel cell were able to rescue the Wookiee prisoners of Kessel. Sadly, Kashyyyk would stay in Imperial hands even after the Battle of Endor. Initially, liberation was celebrated by the Alliance of Free Planets.
Unable to convince the Alliance to send a strike force, Han and Chewie traveled alone to the forest world, unsure of what they might find.
And though the Nagai species attempted to enslave them, the New Republic was able to repel the Nagai, only for Imperial remnant forces to circle back around and recapture them, forcing Han Solo and Chewbacca to come and lead an uprising that finally set them free from all Imperial forces.
The Trandoshan slavers would never get another foothold under a strong Wookiee government, and that meant completely destroying a heavily guarded Imperial fortress.
While in canon, it would also take Han and Chewie coming to the rescue, this time making use of a hyperspace transceiver to neutralize the inhibitor chips. Having grown lax depending on these chips, once the Wookiees realized they were able to fight back, their rage exploded in a bloodbath that turned each imp into a series of scattered limbs and heads, in a revolution that earned them their freedom as quickly as the Republic became the Empire. This might have been all for naught when Star Destroyers responded overhead, prepping for a complete orbital bombardment. But luckily, the New Republic heeded Han's desperate calls for backup, and a friendly fleet was able to force the imps to flee through hyperspace. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet was Life Day, mostly because our best look at it comes from 1 ABY, a year after the destruction of the first Death Star. Their recorded history dates this holiday back for 1.5 million years, and though some details might have changed, it is a time of celebrating the promise given by the Tree of Life, that it would sustain and promote life for eternity, being the mythological giver of all life on world. The day would involve a feast, the honoring of the youth and couple producing offspring, as well as remembering those lost. A painting titled Ancient Life Day shows how these orbs have been a staple of the tradition. Really a piece of technology, a glass-like material that contained a field of stars that acted like a map of the afterlife, the lights to follow on the other side of this life. To make sure you followed the right lights, implying this could go sideways and souls could be lost, presumably after death or even during this holiday, because, and this is very important to understand, part of the insanity of the holiday special, with so many parts being dreamlike and odd, is meant to induce in you the same feeling the people on Kashyyyk were experiencing. Just like how you're supposed to feel sad, nervous, or scared, in sync with the actors on screen, with the holiday special, you're supposed to feel like you're on drugs watching this. Because the Wookiees and Chewie's extended honor family, including Han, Luke, and Leia, were on drugs. To jump ahead to this scene, nobody is here in their physical bodies. They make it obvious with this scene, but it is so trippy that people often miss this. Part of the Life Day ritual was to consume the hallucinogenic orga roots to, quote, help their spirits locate the tree. Most of this planet was on tight Imperial lockdown, and Wookiees off-world would meditate on icons of the tree and astral project back to their homeworld. And thus the Orga root drug was necessary, and the orb was needed to navigate the spirit world safely. That seems crazy, but I'm not making this up. Another quote says that when the Wookiees die, they believe that their souls would, quote, walk off into the stars, which is exactly what you see. And surviving this trip was what Leia mentioned.
A day that takes us through the darkness, a day that leads us into light.
You can see them all wearing the traditional red robes, and there were several other pieces of the wardrobe like the black boots and brass knuckles, but the robe was the most important and never changed. It is unclear what the red color symbolizes, perhaps the blood lost in violent death, and or for the bloody birth. Remember, they gave birth to meter-long live pups. Originally, they would celebrate this day every 3 years, but as it grew in popularity, they started celebrating it yearly. It also became synchronized with other winter holidays, with colorful lights and gift-giving, and despite it being the exact opposite of materialism, of course companies moved in and monetized the craze, as even since the time of the Old Republic Cold War, there were things like speeder bikes being decorated in Life Day themes. Everybody wanted to buy tinsel bombs and other decorations. And though snow played no role in the celebration on the tropical Kashyyyk, it became so tied to Life Day celebrations interpreted by other alien cultures, likely the biggest proponent being Alderaan. So some planets would bring in expensive artificial snow generators to make them feel more like this advertised version of Life Day. What was authentic was the love of music. Figrin D'An and the model nodes developed holiday classics that were loved across the galaxy. This was in the true spirit of Life Day, as the Wookiees said that the beating wood drums dated back to its origins 1.5 million years ago. And in modern times, there was usually a Wookiee choir, and Leia made sure to share her lovely voice. This holiday was so beloved by all sentients across the galaxy that it doesn't seem like the Empire worked hard to crack down on the festivities. It was so loved, it even gave droids an existential crisis.
It is indeed true that at times like this, Artu and I wish that we were more than just mechanical beings, and were really alive, so that we could share your feelings with you.
We see Han struggling to get Chewie back home, but he was one of the most wanted men in the galaxy. Once they get there, they experience the normal amount of Imperial oppression, but it is said that even though the partying wasn't its normal multi-week affair, it did still last for a few days. The only respite for people being crushed by global slavery. And if you think the peace and comfort here in Chewie's family home is odd, I have a theory I'll keep till the end for the cool facts and behind the scenes part. Back to the chronology, their New Republic senator was Kirathrar, and Kashyyyk was the key signatory and member of the Inner Council, reopening trade networks which led to Thickiana becoming a major trading hub, specializing in computer tech of all things. Even this brought them bad luck by 23 ABY, attracting agents of the Second Imperium that raided these computer stores. At least it didn't result in a complete planetary invasion. That would come 2 years later, in 25 ABY, during the Yuuzhan Vong War. The most well-known and beloved hero of Kashyyyk, Chewbacca, would be killed on the planet Cernpadal while helping refugees escape. The memorial service on Kashyyyk, simultaneously observed on countless worlds throughout the galaxy, was the largest in recorded Wookiee history. Knowing Chewie, he would have just been glad to know that he did save so many lives that day, people who were fleeing war, like millions of Wookiees had throughout history. But luckily, due to the Vong hoping to continue their push for the core, his homeworld was relatively unharmed. The Vong captured it on the map, placing some nominal force there to warn off counterattacks, but did not take the time to terraform and completely reshape this planet like the Vong had done with several other worlds. Which is even more lucky considering the raw supply of biomass and dangerous animals that the Vong could work with here. All believed that if the Vong had won the war, or even just had time to consolidate their forces, the Shapers would have worked this planet into something unrecognizable, and essentially make all native species go extinct. With the recapture of Coruscant, the Vong were finally defeated, and 2 decades later, the Second Galactic Civil War kicked off. Though the Wookiees did stay loyal to the Galactic Alliance for some time, Jacen Solo's military force would cause the Wookiees to turn against this human, this member of the late Chewie's honor family, leading these people to join the Confederation, which was led by their old allies on Corellia. The Second Battle of Kashyyyk would take place mostly in orbit, with opposing capital ships. The fighting did involve strikes on important areas planetside, which sparked enormous forest fires that horrified the Wookiees, and their pain was sensed by many in the Jedi Order. Once this conflict burned out and the forests were healing, it was nearly 100 years before we would get the final incident involving alien invaders. Darth Krayt's empire of the 130s ABY wanted to learn from the mistakes of Palpatine. Knowing how powerful and tenacious the Wookiee rebels became, he wanted to simply isolate them. No orbital bombardments, no slavery, just cut the Wookiees out of the conflict by blockading their world, and all nearby hyperroutes, after a blitzkrieg that destroyed all their spaceports and shipyards. In a weird way, this was a very peaceful time, a strange sort of blessing as the Wookiee enjoyed several years without any alien intervention. No wars, but also no bickering traders, legal battles, and alien allies trying to pull you into countless regional conflicts. In the end, after all these wars, the tree people were able to get back to their roots, celebrating Life Day festivals without any outside influence, spending time in the battle-scarred beauty of the nature surrounding them, and connect with their families like never before. So that's it for the history. Here's some cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. A group of Wookiees is called a groove. They have 150 words for wood, and the best compliment they can give you is to groom you with their enormous tongues. Seeing a cancel is good luck in their culture, and we do see one before the Battle of Kashyyyk, which they win, though the Empire did sour this, but at least they weren't stomped out by clankers. Their name comes from an ad-lib in George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138, with Terry McGovern saying, "I think I just ran over a Wookiee," where he just made up some weird funny name. We almost got a Wookiee uprising in Return of the Jedi, with a DS-2 in orbit over Kashyyyk, but Lucas wanted to change this to the Ewoks. Having a smaller force being able to overthrow the Imps was much more dramatic and symbolic, and also cute and great for merch appealing to kids. And Lucas would say that he wanted a primitive Stone Age people versus the technological superpower, but couldn't square Chewie's people being so primitive if he was such a great pilot and mechanic. Early concept art was less hairy and became the basis of the Lasat species, but the final concept art used involved some suspect drama. Ralph McClory claimed that George Lucas showed him this image, claiming it was from the 1930s, but it was actually from the July issue of Analog, an illustration by John Schoenherr for George R.R. Martin's novelette and 7 Times Never Kill Man. If you look, it even has what looks like a bowcaster. So did George Lucas rip this off? Let me know what you think down in the comments. The Wookiee was present in the earliest drafts of The Star Wars, and there was to be an enormous Wookiee battle on their homeworld in A New Hope, which became the Battle of Kashyyyk in Revenge of the Sith. There's no explanation why, but one day Lucas woke up and decreed that there could be no more Wookiee Jedi in the expanded universe. Famously, Han Har was forbidden to be made a Dark Jedi because of this, and Kirlaka, Lobaka, and Tyvaka were the only ones in all of Star Wars for a while. Then, oddly, they could go back in time introducing the Jedi Roar, and even Lucas himself would finally give this up when making the Clone Wars episode The Gathering, giving us Gungi. They were one of the original 24 character templates in the first Star Wars playing gamebook. In the never meant to be taken as canon series Star Wars tales, it is implied that the Sasquatch on Earth is Chewie. An insane fact is that during the filming of The Return of the Jedi, there was such a fear that some hunter might stumble upon the set or see Chewie through a scope that they had Peter Mayhew always wearing bright orange hunting vests when traveling around in different shooting locations. Baka's ceremonial blade has a great story behind it, being an ancient alien artifact discovered by Baka within a probe that landed in the Shadowlands. He showed the elders and chieftains, and they all agreed that this was proof of intelligent life out in the galaxy, long before they had ever come into first contact with aliens. I didn't want to add too much detail to the army and even naval fleet shown in Galactic Battlegrounds, as this is the only time a military of this scale is mentioned. It's more consistent to see each city as a kind of Greek city-state model, with warriors maintaining their own weaponry, identifying heavily with their tree city, but then seeing themselves as a unified people when alien peoples threaten them. Life Day has so much lore that it could be a lengthy video of its own, and has appeared in tons of media, most notably LEGO shows and movies, well of course starting it off with the holiday special, which isn't even on Disney+, and Lucas famously said about it, quote, "If I had the time and a sledgehammer, I would track down every copy of that show and smash it." Now last, and hopefully least, because I don't want to believe it, is what I'll dub the evil Chewie clan theory. The lore states that during the time of the Galactic Civil War, a Wookiee, none of the ones mentioned in the breakdown, helped to keep the slave trade functioning on Kashyyyk. Atichikuk, Chewbacca's pops, was extremely ambitious, being the one that founded the colony on Alaris Prime, fought off the Trade Federation, and knew the political stupidity of the Republic. He was a prominent chieftain, and had one son running around the galaxy as a criminal, and had a grandson at home named Lumpawarum. We know he loved Lumpy and hear nothing of his life in the time between the Battle of Kashyyyk and what we see in that famous Life Day celebration. It's just odd that they live such peaceful lives within a year after the Death Star being destroyed, when the Empire would be going mad, cracking down on everyone, being especially hard on their slave force. We know the Imps would capture the pups and use their torture to keep the Wookiees in line. So to keep Lumpy out of the camps, this long-lived chieftain may have just opted to play nice with the Empire until they inevitably faded away, reasoning that if he resisted, his whole family would just be killed and some other clan would eventually say yes and work with the Imps. So what do you think? Was protecting Lumpy the cause of another dramatic evil father reveal? If you made it this far, please hit that like button, comment your thoughts and suggestions, and check out one of these videos. I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, and the Force will be with you, always.